Welcome to our book club discussion.
Two-person book club.
Two-person book club. That's not true. It's more than a two-person book club. We're going to be discussing the book that we read for our Facebook book club. But we like to do this before we go to Facebook so that our discussions on Facebook don't color our reactions here.
What if we changed our minds? What if discussions with other smart people gave us new ideas? Too bad. We don't talk about those.
So, what's the book?
The book is The Women
By Kristin Hannah.
And this book, I will say, I was a little daunted by the title. I didn't know if I wanted to read a book about some women. Nothing against women, just didn't know if I needed a book about them. But I was pleasantly surprised. This book is more than just about some women.
Yes, it is.
This book is about Vietnam. Mm-hmm. It's about patriotism. Mm-hmm. It's about changing times.
You're waxing
poetic here.
Yes.
It's about changing times and generational gaps. Mm-hmm. It's about how we communicate, about families.
Yes.
About substance abuse.
PTSD.
It's about a lot of things.
It's about a lot of things.
But instead of having titles that say all of that, the title is The Women. So we'll get over that. Okay, but let's jump in.
Yeah, I read this book when it very first came out a year ago. And I remember thinking that was a fabulous book. Gave it 5 stars.
Why don't you start us off with what you liked about this book?
I love when a book teaches me about history that is modern to my... we weren't born in the 70s, so we weren't alive then, but it is modern enough history that I'm aware of it. I know kind of the details from my own history books. It can come alive because I know people who have lived through that time. And I love when a book makes me go to Google and I'm like researching and figuring out what really happened and how it compared to the book. And this book sent me down lots of rabbit holes of things that I didn't know. And we even called his dad up to ask for some perspective of how his dad felt during that time of the war. And that, like, when a book can do that, you've got a good book.
You said 70s.
It's 60s.
Yeah.
It's mostly 60s.
And to experience it in the 60s, you actually had to be born in the 50s.
Yes.
So that's a few years earlier.
Yes. Both of my parents and your parents lived through that era.
Correct. And it is super helpful when you have a book that's based on history that you can go back to people who were actually there and kind of check and vet some things and get perspectives.
Yep.
I think that was my favorite part of the book as well. We learn about these conflicts in school and you get a certain perspective on them, and that's great. Hey, that's what school's for.
Yes.
To learn these things.
Yes.
It's different to read it and get different types of perspectives, and then for that to prompt you to go back and talk to people and kind of get your own feel for it. You almost think that's probably what school is for.
Well,
but we don't do that.
We don't do that in school.
We just write the paper and turn it in and grumble about our teachers and worry about grades.
And the kid comes home and was complaining about her history class just this last week. And I'm like, history is the best subject, but it's just the way that it's presented in class and it just doesn't translate well. And I'm like, yeah, just read a book.
I just said I liked this book, and I did. But for me, like is a 3-star. And it was a 3-star. So there were some things I didn't appreciate it as much. But there's like 3 or 4 things I didn't like about the book. I don't want the volume of those things, though, to take away of the things I did like about the book, which is it was well written.
It was well written.
There were good characters, like characters you cared about and that you really got to know. Mm-hmm. So again, that's under the headline of well written.
Yep.
It was about a timeline in history that I didn't know as much about. I think we both came away wanting to go watch Forrest Gump.
Yep, I did.
For some reason, that is the representative movie for us of Vietnam.
Yes.
Anyway, so those are all positive things, and I don't want to take away from those. However, okay, this one, I'm going to do one in the middle. It's just a comment.
Okay.
When I read historical fiction, I recognize that the author has a perspective that may not be representative of the whole event. With historical fiction, that's almost a challenge when it's well written. Because it was well written, I now have a hard time saying what was real versus what was the fictional additive to make it just a good story. Afterwards, we went and did some research. We talked to some people. I did some online reading and searching. I'm still not sure how much the main character represented real stories. So that's an overall note.
I don't have any problem with that. I feel like that she took a main character who maybe embodied the experience of lots of people or several different women during the time. No, her story was not everybody's story, but her story was her story.
So I don't disagree with everything you said about, hey, real people could have experienced these things. The main characters in these books become real to us.
Yeah.
And we start to mix the historical fiction with actual memoirs. In fact, this wasn't even in my concerns yet. This was just the note before I got to my concerns.
In order to gain a perspective on the women who came home from the war, you don't need everything that she was portraying to be 100% accurate. You were still able to gain the difficulties of coming home from the war, the differences in the women. So there was 3 of them, Frankie, Barb, and Ethel, and they all came home from war, and their transition to regular life was different for all 3 of them. And you can look at it and say, okay, I have these 3 women who all reacted very differently. Why? What was it that helped them each to transition home and be able to handle the traumas of the war? And Frankie obviously did not do very well with that. Barb and Ethel did better. And I don't need them to be real to be able to gain that perspective.
So this is a good segue. So one concern I have is I do feel like there were several agendas throughout the book. It's not that I agree or disagree with any agendas, other than call out that, yeah, I recognize this is written with a purpose. It makes me wonder what the other side was thinking. Were the women being excluded as much as the book portrays? There were thousands of young men who lost their lives tragically, and there's now a wall in D.C. that comes up at the end of the book that lists out their names to give them
58,000 men.
To give them that recommendation.
8 women.
And 8 women.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not belittling those 8 women. Was it really like they were ignored, or was it really, it was a huge anomaly to have any women over there, and when people said there weren't any women in Nam, was there a real basis for that? Because in the book, it comes across like people were just jerks. You know, some of those people, for very real reasons, might have not thought there were any women over there. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't discrimination against women in general in that time.
So we asked his dad about this, if he knew of women who've served in Vietnam. And he, right off the bat, started telling us a story about women that he trained with in
Signal school.
And he was like, those 4 women went on and went to Vietnam. Like, he knew about them. He was very aware of that. So he just, yes, hands down, women served in Vietnam. So that was an interesting perspective. I think that for me, it was the idea that women were seeing the tragedies, the presumption that was because they weren't boots on the ground, guns in arms, that they were protected from the effects and the trauma of what was going on around them. And I feel like that she was trying to take into account the women were experiencing those things. Then when they came home, because so few of them did serve, the VA and those around them were not equipped to aid women specifically in handling the trauma of what they saw. It was all geared towards men.
I will add, though, the VA in her story wasn't equipped to help anybody.
No.
So, I don't know. The fact they excluded women is unfortunate, but they were struggling to do a good job at the whole job of being VA. For me, in this book, there was actually like 3 different sections or issues it's dealt with.
Yep.
You know, one was Vietnam and that whole experience. And that was actually, even though it was the underlying story of the whole book, in an action sense, it was only a third of the book.
Yeah.
The first third of the book, she goes and, spoiler alert, she comes home. She makes it.
She survives.
Yeah, and then there was this other section, or this other theme that was about substance abuse. And then there is a theme of generational values, both the positive and negative of, you know, what were considered traditional values at that point and how the world was changing.
Yep.
And the first third of the book, I actually enjoyed the most.
I feel like based on everything that I know about Vietnam, which isn't a ton, I know more now than I did. I feel like her depictions of it were very accurate.
Before the book, you had experience or knowledge X, and then you read the book, and since then you've read a few websites and talked to my dad.
Yeah.
And so most of
and
the
I watched
change...
Forrest Gump.
No, we watched Forrest Gump before. That was part of what we already knew. All I'm saying is that most of that change is actually the book. If we read historical fiction and feel like we have a basis in the history, with forgetting how much the word fiction is there. That's my concern. So, but let's move on.
I have no concerns about that.
I know you don't.
No
My
concerns
concern
about
is people that don't have concern about
I
that.
know.
This is going to be a heavily edited video. So, substance abuse, both, hard drugs, prescription drugs, and alcohol on the part of the main character after the war.
Yep.
And at the end of the book, that's a big hurdle to overcome.
Yeah.
And she does.
Spoiler.
Level. I do think that was a major theme, though. What are your thoughts as a theme in this book? Did you feel like it was helpful, necessary, distracting?
For her agenda, or whatever she was trying to teach us, she took us down the path with Frankie that was that path. And I didn't have any problem following that path with her. I felt like that, although not a path that I would choose in handling PTSD or whatever, it was a path that I feel many chose. And a lot of men and women who go to war come home, and substance abuse is how they handle, is how they drown out, is how they try to find a way to escape all of the memories and all of the things that they have seen. And I had no problem following that path with her. If you followed Barb and Ethel, you wouldn't have a book. They came home. Ethel jumped into her farm in her family, and she married, and she started having kids, and she was able, her support system around her was able to give her what she needed so that she could move forward in her life. Barb, same thing. She had her family. She really jumped into that support system. And Frankie's family, she came home to, she didn't have that support system in place for her to come home to allow her the most successful transition.
And, I think Barb's story wasn't quite... She had some family support, but she also came home to family tragedy.
Yes, her brother died. And
a lot of anger.
Yes.
Barb was the stand-in representative race discrimination story.
Yes.
To represent what was going on at the same time.
Yep, the civil rights era. That whole thing was happening at the same time.
And her brother was a vet who turned into a Black Panther, and then, well, I won't spoil everything.
Yeah.
So that was part of the story.
Yeah.
It felt like, again, it's all being crammed in here. I think it could have been a book about Vietnam, and she could have stopped. And I feel this way about most books. Most books feel about a third too long, but they try to do too much. Maybe that's a good summary how I feel about this one. She tried to take on every single issue of the 60s. She tried to write a new Forrest Gump. It's like, it's not that wasn't going on, but I thought this book was about Vietnam. And this goes to my third point, is the values thing. She chose to turn to substance abuse and alcohol or whatever. In the story, all of the blame and causation was pointed back to Vietnam and discrimination against women and the government's lying and all that sort of stuff. I feel like it totally skipped the part about personal choice. And here were two other examples of people in the same situation that didn't go that route. Her choice to do substance abuse and lie, there was infidelity, all of those things were her personal choices along the way. And I'm big on personal choice.
And when we were discussing it earlier this week, I said, I have one question for you.
You actually have lots of questions, but okay, I don't remember the one. We talked about it a lot.
This was the main, we did have one, but I've kept this question in my head.
Oh, you held it for this moment?
I held it for this moment.
Okay. Do I have to edit it out?
No.
Okay, I won't edit.
You have these three women, right? Why? Why were their decisions so different? Why did they choose the things that they chose to help them or hinder them in their coping? So for her to depict that in Frankie, I don't feel like was out of line.
Okay, you're not gonna like my answer.
I know I'm not.
How do you know you're not?
because we've already had somewhat of a similar conversation about this, and I didn't like it then.
Well, this is why I said my note at the beginning, is you're asking a single data point question really 3 times. Why did this person succeed? You know, why did this person act the way they did? Why did Barb act the way she did? Why did Ethel act the way she did? And why did Frankie act the way she did? We can, and we'll go on and have a discussion about it, but the short answer is they're all fictional. And we feel like these were real characters.
Yes, but they are depicting what really could happen in real life. And we know about soldiers that have gone and done the exact same things. So we can, through conjecture, can try to find empathy and understanding by reading these fictional characters. We do it all the time. And we know soldiers that do those things.
And I would say each one of those soldiers has an answer to this question. And we can answer it in terms of a character. Why do I think they did these things? I think they all stayed true to who they were before the war. I don't think the war mattered. Ethel was raised on a farm with strong values in a strong family and went home and had strong values in a strong family.
Yes.
Barb was raised in a situation with discrimination all around her that, you know, there's whole books with very valid viewpoint and helpful, right, about the civil rights movement. She was dealing with that before. And in the end, that's really that's what she came home to.
She came home to the same thing.
And went to the same thing. Frankie, her parents did not have a strong moral base.
No.
She came from money, and she had all of the symptoms and sign of a rich kid with busy parents who were trying to keep up appearances in the world, and they didn't have a good relationship. They didn't model anything. If you took the war, which was the best part of the book, if you took the war out, she just went back and ended up an emotional alcoholic wreck with other substance abuse issues like many rich kids. You could have written the whole story without the war. That's my thing. And why did it go down like that? Because the author created characters, and the author wrote about Vietnam, but really wrote the same character tropes we all see. And there's nothing wrong with that in a fiction book. The hard thing is, my issue is just how much do we take away and apply that to Vietnam?
So this goes back to your things about values.
Yeah. This is the values portion of it. You could have written a book about Vietnam and sent them all home and done a chapter or 2 of each of them after the war and how they handled it without diving into the play-by-play depth of the next 10 years of her life and all the stupid stuff she did. Like, I didn't care. And, okay, this has all been for fun. Everything we said, I still give this 4 stars.
You do?
I would. But I gave it 3 stars.
Oh.
I dropped a whole star for one stupid move at the end. So throughout the book, there is trauma and people dying and all this stuff. And at the very end, the author brings a character back to life for no reason other than to satisfy the reader. And you don't even know where it goes. She wants to end it with a smile. She wants to end with a happy story. And I prefer happy stories. I'm not a grimdark kind of guy. I'm not a horror guy. Mm-mm. I don't like tragedies. But that was so obviously manipulated. It was an eye roll, and I dropped a star. And I'm just like, really? And so, the first third to half the book is the book. And the rest of it is an interesting read. It's not, again, the whole book is well written. Mm-hmm. Okay, except for that last little part. I think a lot of times we read historical fiction and feel like we went to history class, and that's not true. so that was my beef.
Okay. I will say that the last ending scene with that particular character.
We shouldn't spoil that one.
I won't. Is an eye roll, but I just love the journey, the whole journey of her life and of Frankie, and I was fully invested. It's a 5-star read for me. It was a 5-star read the first time. It was a 5-star read the second time, and highly recommend.
If I want to analyze us for a minute, you are okay without accuracy in a lot of things, and that's okay.
Yes.
I am concerned about accuracy a lot. Yes. And so in this type of book, we're probably not likely to agree as much. But What we do agree on is it was well written.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good book.
Yep.
I did like it. Like I said, we talked so much about all the things I didn't like.
We had an hour-long conversation with his dad about Vietnam and just his life in general. That was so enriching, and we would not have had that conversation unless we had read this book.
So that's a sign of a good book.
Yep.
I do think it's poorly titled. There's so many issues and things she's addressing in here. Of all of them, to then try to rest the whole story on the discrimination. Well, the discrimination against women is what she really tried to rest it on. But it's richer than that. I'm just careful. I learned a lot from this book, but I'm not taking what I read in a historical fiction book as I now know anything.
Happy reading, everybody.